Since President Trump took office in 2016, he's been adamant about tackling the issue of voter fraud in America's elections. In recent months, the president has ramped up his rhetoric as the pandemic has caused millions of people across the country to reconsider in-person voting on November 3rd.
They're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud. They found them in creeks. They found some with the name Trump, just happened to have the name Trump just the other day in a waste paper basket. It's very hard to watch. You know, millions of ballots, very hard to watch. And it's the only way that's the only way we're going to lose is if there's mischief, and it'll have to be on a big scale.
In addition, the president has repeatedly used Twitter to spread misinformation about the mail-in voting process. In a recent tweet, he called mail drop boxes a, quote, voter security disaster and stoked fear of contracting the coronavirus by suggesting they are not COVID sanitized. In an article recently published in the New York Times titled "The Attack on Voting: How President Trump's False Claim of Voter Fraud is Being Used to Disenfranchise Americans," explores how Mr. Trump's rhetoric stems from a history of voter suppression and ongoing efforts to limit the voices of millions of Americans. The author of that article, Jim Rutenberg, joins us now. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for being with us. So the Trump administration has been pushing the narrative that voter fraud is one of the biggest concerns surrounding elections for years. Why is this an effective tactic for the president?
Well, first, thanks for having me. But it kind of meets a lot of ends for him. It lets him hit several goals at once. Most immediately, it can be a suppressive message right off the bat. You opened up this segment with his false allegation that drop boxes are disastrous. They're not disastrous. But some people could decide, well, if there's not a way to drop off my ballot safely in a drop box and I'm worried about the mail, I'll vote in person. And say there's a bad COVID outbreak in that person's area, maybe they decide not to vote in person. There's a vote that's lost.
So we know that the president is a frequent user of social media. How is his online presence exacerbating the issue and spreading this narrative? And why don't we see more federal agencies speaking out on these attacks?
Well, I'll start with the second question first, and that's he controls the federal agencies. They are clearly sort of cowed by the messaging out of the West Wing. And you even see agencies like the CDC. I had found that their early voting guidance had endorsed mail voting back in March, and later guidance in the spring and early summer, that mail suggestion dropped away. So he's got control of this government. And so no one's going to really, people are not speaking out perhaps the way they should. And he himself, I mean, he has an incredible platform. He's like no president we've ever seen. And we've seen it time and time again where he can flood social media with false information. And in this case, he's doing it about voting. And the social media companies are really struggling to contain this. They're not like CBS News or the New York Times, where they monitor the content that goes out over their pipelines. So he has free reign to spread false information about voting, and they're trying to meet this and trying to fact check him where they can. But so far, it's been I think most critics would say, a subpar performance.
And during the first presidential debate, Jim, we heard the president call for his followers, his supporters, to monitor the polls. Now, this is supposedly an effort to dissuade fraudulent voting in November, but it's also could be construed as voter intimidation. So that is a federal crime. How has poll watching historically impacted elections, and who does it generally target?
Well, historically, poll watching, I mean, the Klan did it back, in our earlier history to intimidate newly enfranchised black voters and scare them out of showing up at polls. More recently, and very interestingly, in the early 80s, the Republican Party was banned from poll monitoring because of allegations that in a race in New Jersey, a gubernatorial race in 1981, they had used poll monitors to, again, intimidate voters of color. They were banned from doing this as a party, the Republicans were, until just a couple of years ago. A judicial ruling lifted that order. So now for the first time in that many years, decades, the Republican Party can monitor polls. And there is some concern that when the president uses rhetoric like that, that this could lead to some violence and definitely a lot of disruption. In fact, at the debate, the president had referenced some poll watchers who showed up to a Pennsylvania poll station and were turned away, and this was illegal. It was not illegal. Poll watchers are not allowed to show up under Pennsylvania state law at this point to monitor polls. So that was during early voting. So, there's just the misinformation upon misinformation.
So, of course, it goes without saying the presidential election is the cornerstone of American democracy, and all Americans should want as many Americans to participate as possible. So why is President Trump aggressively attempting to undermine the election process?
Well, it appears that he has made a calculation, and he's almost given voice to this, that he will not win if a large number of voters vote. That he believes that he can only win if the electorate is kind of shrunken. He said this, that some of the voting proposals that came along with the pandemic, he said, well, if they let all this voting, Republicans could never win again. I don't even think that's true. Most political scientists would say there's no hard evidence for that, but he tends to believe this. And he certainly believes in this. He does have a basis for that Democrats are going to use the mail more than Republicans. So while an attack on the mail system might hurt some of his own voters, he is seeking to win that in-person vote, which is those are the results we'll find out about on election night, so that he can claim some early victory before the mail ballots are counted.
Well, Jim Rutenberg, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.